You know, if I were to ask you all if you thought prayer was important, put your hand up. Yeah? Okay, now let's say, now put your hand up if you are great at prayer. And there's the anomaly, isn't it? Something that we know is important, and yet we feel a little inadequate when it actually comes to actually seeking that direction and putting our lives in the hands of God. And over this week, we are going to be meeting in prayer, because we believe that prayer is an important part of any Christian community, where we are seeking God's direction for our families, for our church, for our life, for our community and our nation. And so this week, starting today and Sunday, Monday, Wednesday, Friday and Sabbath, we're going to be having and seeking. So you can either join online or you can join us in person. We'd love you better to join us in person, but we understand that life is difficult as well. So we will be facilitating groups online as well. So and next Sabbath there'll be an agape feast. So and the churches will be, a church side will be meeting and there'll be foot washing. In here we'll just have the agape meal without the foot washing. So you can choose which side you actually go to for that. So we want to focus on Jesus in all the seasons of our life as we go through this week, yeah? And we're not only doing this by ourselves. Now, right around Australia, we have 10 days of prayer, but for what the process that we're going and the curriculum that we're doing over this week, we're actually joining with Port Macquarie Church with Kendall and Linnell. And Linnell has done all our graphics for posters and things like that. So, you know, we're doing the journey with another church, and I hope that this will be such a blessing to you and your families. The kids from 4 o'clock, you can download that so they can kind of be led along as well. So, now, what does it mean to be by the seasons of life? You know, you could say that the seasons of life are just chronological seasons, like spring representing birth and childhood, summer representing adulthood, autumn meaning the mature phase of life, and winter, well, we all understand where winter is, and it's a difficult one, but life goes in chronological sequence, yeah? It doesn't always, there's two things that we understand in life. We will be born and the other end of things as well, you know? And there are seasons that we go through. But I hope that as we go through this week, our approach will be a little bit more nuanced than that. You know, while no two people in this body will go through the same, go through it in the same way, the metaphor of seasons can give insights to the ups and downs, the highs, the lows, the periods of intimacy, as well as the times of stagnation in our life. And we all know that we have those periods that we go through. And, you know, in both our spiritual lives and our prayer lives. So, in each of our lives, we could have many winters. You know, times when things seem at an end, when for some reason we are really lonely. We seem to be doing things tough by ourselves, even though we're in a crowd, even though we're in a community. You know, when we think that life is bleak and without too much meaning. Yeah? We could have many springs, new beginnings. For me, I've had lots of new beginnings, and you think about your life so far, if you've got a little bit of experience, even if you're a young adult or a young guy in the front row here, and I'm talking to Nick, yeah, you have had different seasons, newness, when you started school, when you started a new grade, or maybe started playing a new game, or started into a friendship that was new, meeting new people. There's all sorts of things that we face that can be new, and you see, fresh approaches, new opportunities, new jobs, new locations. If you're a part of the Advent movement is a very key operation. We've been all around Australia, over to England. There is a lot of movement in a movement, hopefully. And in this church, as a movement, we want to be moving as well. But, this morning we want to focus on ensuring that every season that you face, no matter what it is, no matter what your relationship or your prayer life with God is like, that we come away with a common understanding of what it means to align ourselves with God's will in our lives, one, and two, how that enacts through our love for ourselves and our fellow travellers. What does it look like? So I'd like you to turn with me to Ecclesiastes. So Ecclesiastes 3 is a key passage, and I have it up the back. Ecclesiastes 3, it says this: "There's a time for everything, and a season for every activity under the heavens, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant, a time to uproot, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to tear down and a time to build, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to scatter stones and a time to gather them, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to search and a time to give up, a time to keep and a time to throw away, a time to tear and a time to mend, a time to be silent, a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace." Wow. Does that sound like a list that refers to the seasons in our lives, yeah? Have you had all those seasons? It sounds like God well understands the changing seasons we go through on our journey on earth. And because he knows and made us and the seasons, he knows what we're going to face in those seasons. And what we need, of course, during the ups and downs is to know that the time for everything are faced with our hands in his. We're not alone. You're not alone when you're going through those scattering times, those weeping times, those more confrontational times, those difficult times where you have to grapple with what's going on in life. You don't go through that alone. It's with our hand in his and in relationship with him. And we are drawn this week, this week we're looking, a lot of the material comes from a book by Dutch Sheets called God's Timing for Your Life, and also from Daniel and his mates, which you saw some of the actual biblical story. And so, you know the book well. Now, the Sabbath school class, the life group that meets out in the foyer has been going through Daniel as a part of their Bible study. And they were at Daniel 3 this week. And it was the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Now, so you know the story well. 600 years before Jesus, there's these there's exile, and the children of Israel are sent out, are led out of Jerusalem. And you know, I think we sanitize this picture because we have these guys that go out and all of a sudden they're in a new nation with Nebuchadnezzar, but we forget the burning city that they left, the homes, the casualties that they actually left to start this new life. That was, you know, I mean, they knew something was going to happen, but then they were on the road. So they went, and for them, they get into this new kingdom. And these 4 boys, they go, you know, we're not going to eat of the king's table. We're not going to actually eat. Why did they stand up? Because all of a sudden, they're faced with decisions that they had to make. But they were going to be God's people all the way. You know, and after 3 years in being taught in the way of the Chaldeans, they became wiser and fitter than all the people that were around them. Now, Nebuchadnezzar, the king, he has this dream. We're familiar with the dream. Daniel interprets it, and the king, wanting to deny the prophecy, he builds this golden, you know, Daniel's there, and all his mates were going to be put to death if God hadn't given him the answer. I mean, while he looks very composed in our Western composition of this picture, I imagine this was a scary time for Daniel as he stepped out in faith and went, God, show us, and then he spoke the things that God had shown him in the dream. Now, Nebuchadnezzar tries to get away from, he doesn't want the bit of the kingdom that's rolling towards and the destruction. So he goes, no, I'm not going to live with this interpretation, and he builds another. He builds an image on the plains of Jura, and there when the music played, everybody was to bow down to his image because he wanted his kingdom to go on forever. But guess what? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego refused to bow down. And now we know this. And then, as a result of that, they were cast into the furnace. But there was another in the fire. Another in the fire with them. And Nebuchadnezzar is overwhelmed by the power of their God because these boys walk out of the furnace unharmed. I mean, I know you have heard that story. I have heard it since I was, and for some it may be new. And if it is new, the astounding picture here, when you're in the furnace, we need to be overwhelmed by the God who walks with us through the furnace as well. And over this week, we'll unpack this story. But 800 years before this story, we have another story of nation building. Now, the Israelites had been in Egypt for 430 years. Egypt, and if you want to follow along in Joshua chapter 1, 2 and 3, just flip in your Bibles back there. But for 430 years, they'd been in exile in Egypt. Moses had led them through 40 years of Exodus, and then he died. He hadn't entered the promised land, and they were poised under the leadership of Joshua to finally cross the Jordan. Finally, Joshua and Caleb, 2 men, were left of the original guys that came out of Egypt. Now, can you imagine that? How long do you reckon they would get to prepare for this crossing? They've been 40 years in the desert. How many months do you think they were told to prepare for this? Any ideas? Did you read? Was it months? Was it weeks? No? Nope. 3 days. 3 days, get your stuff. Yeah, and it's this transition. After 40 years in the desert, they finally get to possess the land flowing with milk and honey that had been promised to Abraham. And here they are, this extraordinary time in history when they look back on the book of Joshua. God gives some keys. And what we're going to do this morning, just briefly, is look at some of those keys of how they went into this promised land. And if you're listening this morning, maybe quietly consider what this means for your journey as we go into 2023. Your journey with prayer and the seasons and transitions of life that you will face this year. I don't know what it is for you, what you are going through, you and your family, or how great life is for you at the moment. Not everybody is going through difficult times. Not everybody is going through those seasons. But for each of us, we are doing a journey with God this year as a community. What if you trusted God to lead in your life, your whole life, and nothing else but His will in your life this year? What would that look like? What is He expecting of you in 2023 as you step out in faith? What does He already have planned if only you will surrender and do His will? Is there only one plan? That's probably the question. What does it mean to walk hand in hand with God this year is the question that I ask. So there are a couple of things, and the first point I'd like to make is this. Accept responsible for doing our part as we transition in the seasons. Now, Joshua 1 and 2, the Lord said to Joshua, son of Nun, Moses' aide, Moses, your servant is dead. Now then, you and all these people, get ready to cross the river into the land I'm about to give them to the Israelites. Joshua had been there, he'd gone and he'd seen, and here they are at the gate, and they have 3 days. You know, he didn't send them into an empty Canaan. Do you think God could have cleared out Canaan before they even got there? I think so. I would want that, wouldn't you? I wouldn't want to have to go in and battle. I would want God who can part waters. They knew that from the Red Sea. I would want that. And yet, they were to practice faith as they were taking over Canaan. And their first task was going to be to confront the dreaded city of Jericho. Becoming a nation was going to take centuries of working together with God. And it's interesting that this word forgiving I'm about to give is actually talks about the concept of a sense of assignment, giving an assignment. That's how it is with God's gift with us. He gives them to us as assignments to serve His purposes. You know, to bring heaven and to earth in our communities. That's our commission, our tasking. What do we do with that responsibility as we accept our part in this transition? Secondly, we move ahead in faith when it doesn't seem like the right season. You know, the picture that you saw at the start of this segment of the priests walking into the water. Can you imagine what it would have been like being one of the priests? Have you ever had a task that you were expected to do and something didn't happen when you expected it to happen, and it meant that you couldn't move forward? Can you imagine what these guys did as they had the ark? They knew the history of Israel, that they hadn't been to this land. They had 3 days to prepare, and then they're walking at the lead of this group of people. What would it have taken to take that first step for you? That first step, and then put your foot in the water and see it parted, where the water... And you know, it's strange that... Why didn't God give them a time when it wasn't flood season, where this creek that they were covering, it was only about 10 metres wide when it wasn't in flood. But here they were in flood, where it was almost a K across, and you know, the water was about, you know, maybe 10 metres deep. And all of a sudden, this is what they're confronted with. So, but all of the men, with the exception of Caleb and Joshua, who had seen the phenomenon of the parting of the Red Sea. So these guys didn't have the experience that those people that had died had, but they'd heard the story. They'd heard the stories passed down. Would that experience of God leading in the past, would that happen again as they had their foot poised? This time, they broke camp, and as the feet touched the water, or didn't touch the water parted. A clear path appeared ahead. What a way to start a journey, hey? What a way. But the note is, for us, that they didn't wait for the waters to part. And sometimes for us, we wait for all these conditions to be met till the right timing, and they stepped into God's instructions. And so it is with us. In our seasons of change, we may need to step confidently into what we've been shown is God's will, even though it takes faith to do so. And we can only do that if we are in a powerful prayer relationship with God, I believe. You know, if our time with Him is the driving force in our hearts, you know, it will make it easier to step out. And I want to encourage you today. I don't know who is paused, just with their leg up here today, ready to step into the waters. But know this same God is at work in your life, as was back there for Joshua and Caleb and the Israelites. Know it. You know, I don't know what it is for you, but I encourage you in faith, after you've sought God's direction, to take that step of action. Oftentimes we seek and we seek and we seek, and we don't actually take action. You know, and move ahead in faith when it doesn't seem right. Sometimes it doesn't seem right to us. Yet God has you, and He will have you, and He will part the waters. Or not, and maybe that is a sign as well. The third point is be flexible. Trust the timing of God. You know, whenever you go through difficult times, 3 days. Wow, not much notice, hey? 3 days. I can't even think about that when, that's the notice God gave. And God can sometimes act quite suddenly in our lives when we're not prepared. And perhaps at a time when you're comfortable. I know when, for Son and I, we our family, things were going really well in about 2012. You know how you have those nice times in life as a family and everything goes sweet. I was a police officer. I'd just got into a nice, cosy station after the mayhem that was Surfers Paradise, and a friend rang and said, "You need to put in an application. Put in an application because we need the skills that you have." And Son and I prayed about it. It was sweet for us as a family. My son was going into year 12. Daughter was changing away in a specialty, Mandarin specialty. Half the subjects were taught in Mandarin, and it was a great program. And as a family, it was a good spot for us. And we had, maybe a week to put in a resume and to change. And for me, I look back and we went, we've never knocked back a call. We've tried to respond. We said no when we got there, and I've shared that before. But for us, that was that. And I am so glad we took that step. So glad. It didn't work out how I expected. Never does. And that's the journey with God. God is not safe. Do not ever think that your journey with God will be safe. But I can assure you that when you make those changes, when you take those actions, He is faithful. He is just. And He will lead you when you step out in faith. And even though sometimes in our hastiness we make mistakes, God still has you. When you seek to align, to study and to learn, and we saw at the end of last year, we saw how David, he didn't get it right on the first time. He didn't get it right. But you know what? He got it right the second time. And there are added consequences. And you remember a couple of weeks ago we had Paul Coleman talking about his journey with the Holy Spirit and his journey of faith. He spoke about the absolute excitement and the unpredictability of being open and flexible to the prompting of the Spirit in his life. In any situation, based on surrender to and trust in God. Go back and look if you missed it. It's about the 28th of January. Just go back and have a look. Because that is what we want. Be flexible and trust the timing of God. Remember the basics. Be single-minded is the next one. Remember the basics. Be single-minded. Whenever you go through difficult times, exciting times, long for changes, Sometimes we have those far-off projects that we work towards and we're finally getting there. You've got a degree. What then? Those, or you've finished your externship, or you've got to be senior in your area of expertise, or you've finally got that relationship that you've been longing for. What then? Or you've been married. What then? Remember the basics. Remember to put God's word and your relationship with Him first. Be strong and courageous. Be careful to obey all the law my servant Moses gave you. Do not turn from it to the left or the right. Isn't that great? To the left or the right. And, it's interesting. Has anybody ever tried, without a compass, in the bush, to follow a bearing? We think we're pretty good. I'm pretty good at direction. But you know what? If without thinking, I will naturally walk over to my right. I've ended up, I was leading a group to Mount Mistake, up on the ranges out near Goomba Valley, walking along, and I was following compass bearing, set the compass bearing, and I didn't pick a target in the future, in the distance, which I normally do, a tree or something like that, I just thought, oh yeah, that's the direction. Man, what a mistake. It was not only a mistake that was a mistake, it was a mistake. I went down the side of the hill and ended up in a valley, and then we had to find our way out. You know, if we don't have something that keeps us on direction, we will go left or right. We will go left, where we just drift away from the direction that God has in point. Remember the basics. Be single-minded in your seeking of God and His direction for you and your family, for you and your partner, for you and your friends, your friendship groups. Be single-minded. The 4 Hebrew boys did that, It's interesting that they didn't actually stand up. God only shows us through Daniel a couple of instances where they stood up. One was food, and another one was standing up in the plains of Dura. Another one was Daniel praying. We don't see it, and yet he was in this corrupt government where they actually had to function. I wonder whether there are other things where they didn't quite do the same thing. How did they choose which things to stand up for and which things not? And we have that same situation, that dilemma that we are faced with living in a world where our government and society is heading in a direction at the moment that isn't always what we want. And we're making decisions as leaders or as parents in a society. How do we make those? How do we stay single-minded, not veering to the left or right? What does it look like in your world, your work, your family, your friendship circles, your church community? Remember God's leading in the past and build faith. Now, suffice to say, it's interesting here that out of the middle of the experience, they've walked through the waters. All of Israel is safe on this shore. Yeah? What did God make them do? He sent 12 people back into the center of that experience, and they grabbed these massive rocks. And there on the side of the river, they built an altar of sacrifice out of the experience that they'd had, that every time they built and sacrificed on that altar, they remembered what had happened, how God had delivered, how God had provided, how God had provided a way. And we need those places, those altars in time and place and experience that we can go back to. Think about the things that you go back to that remind you of the faith and faithfulness of this great God who serves, who we serve. What are they? And I know that you could tell that. Each of you sitting here, and I hope you can actually tell where those altars in time are. Those altars of place where you've been, an experience that you look back and you go, God was there, so now. And I hope it is. And if you haven't, maybe we can work on that, where we do the journey as a community and see and draw attention to where God is working. I hope as we go through 2023, yeah? So remember God's past leading. It builds faith to the future. The next one is a little bit hard. Complete obedience and the promises God makes. So it's interesting. Obey is said 12 times in 16 verses in chapter 1 of Joshua. Yeah, it's not something that we like because we're not about a code for God working, are we? I do this and God will do that. Is that how we work? No, that's not how it works. Because in the end, it's not about us. But, as we move through the seasons and transitions, as we bring our desires and longings to God in prayer, do we see the connection between answered prayer and obedience? I think there is a connection, but I don't believe it's a code. It's not something, God works in spite of you. The God we serve can't be put in a box, will not be boxed. And, is there a connection between obedience and answered prayer? And it's really important. There are a couple of texts that, whatever you have commanded us, we will do, said the people. And wherever you send us, we will go, they answered Joshua when he told them what God was wanting to do. Just go to the next text. There's a couple of passages, God promises to answer according to his will, not ours. This is the confidence we have in approaching God, that if we ask anything according to his will, he hears us. But wait, there's more to it than that. We may ask God to answer a prayer, and that may well be within his will, but have we made it a practice to be obedient with him? The next one is pretty important. It's found in 1 John 3:21-24. It says, and friends, once that's taken care of, and this is in the Message, not NIV, sorry, and we're no longer accusing or condemning ourselves, we're bold and free before God. We're able to stretch out our hands and receive what we ask for because we're doing what he said, doing what pleases him. And again, this is God's commandment, to believe in his personally named Son, Jesus Christ. He told us to love each other in line with the original command. As we keep his commands, we live deeply and surely in him. And he lives in us. And this is how we experience his deep and abiding presence in us, by the Spirit he gave us. And this spirit of community, of togetherness and connection both with God and serving our fellow people and love, this is core to us as a community, as a church. Have a meaningful relationship with God, and that is demonstrated through how we treat each other. Who would have thought that's what he was asking us to do? Is that all there is to it? Is it? Love God, serve others. Yeah? There will be battles. We will have to fight. Yeah. I'll give every place where you set your foot, as I promised Moses. Trouble is, every place where they set their foot was where there was somebody else, right? No matter how close our relationship with God, how we submitted to his will we are, how powerful our prayer life, there will be times, as there were with Joshua, where we have to fight a battle together with God. The meaning for God's promise that he will give them every place they set their foot. And I guess the actual Hebrew word is durak, where it says that it's the wherever they set their foot was like a march. So they actually had to march along, and that was the meaning of that word. So it was that, those battles, a march or tread. God was telling them that they would have to do their part, and there'd be battles to be fought. So, what are the battles you face? And the devil tries to thwart the plans God has for your and my life at every turn he can. But if we keep our focus on God, our commitment to his will, whatever the battle is, God promises that we will win with his strength. Wherever you set your foot, this is the same God. When you're in the thick of those battles, though, it's not always easy. I understand that. I went as a police officer. We were in, and I don't know what you know about Surfers Paradise, but it's a fairly difficult place to police. Every gang has their digs in there. A lot of nights, and we would do like 7 to 9 nights every month, and often as we would be on the night duties, especially in the initial years that I was in the service, 2005, 2006, the battle was very physical. Some nights there would be like a lot of very physical arrests and club fights, because at the time there were a lot of drugs in the clubs, and you would be going into raging battles where like maybe 50, 60 people were fighting, and you were just trying to get to the heart of that. And it was difficult, I understand that physical balance, that battle that you have, and that for me, I'm a pacifist. I'm not, that's not me. And here I was as a pastor. I'd been 15 years a pastor before I got to being in that scene, going in and slam dunking and shipping them out, and it was just brutal. And for me, I feel like sometimes in life we have battles, whether it's in stuff that we're confronting. And for some of you, it may be mental health battles. It may be relational battles. It may be, progression, life direction battles. It may be, you're in a workplace that just isn't you. Sometimes it's direct confrontation with your orientation that is God-given in your workplace. Or it may be with your partners. There's battles that will be fought, but I encourage you to look to Jesus. Keep connected. Don't disconnect. Travel in community. Recognise your need for community is the last point that I have for you. There's one last point. Recognise your need for family and community. It's interesting that the guys, the Reubenites, the Gadites, and half the tribe of Manasseh, they didn't need to cross into the promised land, did they? But guess what? This is what it says: but all your fighting men ready for battle must cross over ahead of the fellow Israelites. The women could stay and the children could stay, but you fighting men go across, and you're to help them until the Lord gives them rest, and as he has done for you, until they too have taken possession of the land the Lord your God has given them. After that, you may go back. We do battle together. We do journey together. I hope this year, as we go through life, that you can connect in a small group where you can really do great battle and journey together. That's where we thrive. We were made for connection. The body of Christ is not meant to be a solo journey. There are times where you've got to stand by yourself, but that wasn't how it was meant to be. And I want you to find connection. Talk to one of the elders, talk to myself, one of the pastoral staff, or Russ, or Jan, or the guys, or to Warren. We would love you to be a part of an intentional small group that does the journey of life together. We would love to do that. And we'll launch a bit. You will hear a bit more of that as we go through. But suffice to say, I really hope that in 2023, you can be sustained by his peace. Yep. That there is another in the fire with you. You know, have I not commanded you, be strong and courageous, don't be afraid, do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. This is the promise that we cling to. Whatever season you or your family is going through, your community enjoy or endure, that you can surrender to God's will for your life, that as you rest in his peace, which comes from surrender and obedience to his will, that you'll be able to celebrate big time at the close of this year, because you know you've walked with God and there's been another in the fire with you. Thanks.